Eileen lit a cigarette, and taking a deep pull on it, she blinked back the tears that were threatening to spill over. A few minutes earlier, she had sponged down her mother's body, and the sheer devastation of it had moved her profoundly. She already looked dead, and Eileen knew that it couldn't be long before she went. She watched through the kitchen window as her twin sister Kathleen made sandwiches and talked to anyone who would listen to her. Poor Kath, as she was known. It would hit her hard as well. That bastard Lance was dead, but never to be forgotten by any of them, no matter how hard they tried to push him from their thoughts. His death had been the finish of their mother, even though Eileen knew she had hung on until she knew he was finally gone. Lance had crossed the line, and the heinous nature of his offence had sent shockwaves through the whole family. It was another secret, and they were used to secrets. Being secretive was second nature to the Brodies. Let people guess, let them wonder. She didn't care anymore. Christopher, unlike his brother Pat, was in a squad car being driven into London. He had been questioned about Lance's death, as had the rest of his brothers and sisters. Once his mother was gone, it would be open season, and they all knew that. He expected the rows to start, though Patrick would probably put a block on them. Sean sipped at his tea and watched as his sister Kathleen made sandwiches with a speed that denoted years of practice. Lance was the only one in the family he had never cared for. He had been a bully, and a vicious bully at that. But Sean knew that his silence had been right, and when it had finally come to her head, he was glad that he had not been the one to cause it. "He's a spiv, like his old man, but what can you do?" Barry Caldwell held out his arms in supplication, and the men in the public house smiled with him. They were strained smiles, though, and Barry observed that much and learned a valuable lesson. He had fucked with the wrong person. Patrick Brodie, however, laughed heartily at the man's words. It was time to share his good fortune, he knew that, but at the moment he was collecting a debt that was long overdue, a debt that Barry had tried to ignore, believing that he would not have the front to come after him. Brodie's name was synonymous with skullduggery, and he knew that only the rumours surrounding his dishonourable discharge from the army and his phenomenal temper, coupled with the element of surprise, had stood between him and a firearm this night. Everything had changed with the war, and he had seen that it was a new era coming, and that the new world they would finally inhabit was open to all sorts of money-making schemes. This meant a new criminal fraternity, and Brodie was determined that he would be a big part of that change. It was what he had worked towards. It was what made him the man he was, and it was why Barry was now awaiting his downfall. It was the 60s, and life was sweet for anyone with a bit of nous and a few quid to sweeten their journey through life. Patrick was one of the first to challenge the likes of Barry Caldwell and his ilk. It was in with the young and out with the old. His mind made up, he picked up his beer, and emptying the straight-lined courage glass of its contents, he proceeded to smash it with all the force he could muster into Barry Caldwell's chubby, pasty, and comically surprised face. He was quick to note that none of the men around him tried to intervene, and he knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that his instincts, as usual, had been spot on. They were finished, and they all knew it. Well, he was still young enough to make his mark, yet old enough to command respect. Pat Brodie was on his way up, and at 29 he was ready to put his money where his notoriously close mouth was. Lily Diamond was tired out. Her shift had been long, and her legs were swelling from 14 hours of standing in a freezing factory on a cold floor. As she went into her house, she was already yawning, and her mother took a coat from her, hung it on the back of the door, and poured her a cup of steaming black tea. Then, with her usual swiftness, she placed a plate of ham and eggs in front of her. This was all done in silence, so as not to wake the drunken man, who was quietly snoring on the settee in the small parlour nearby. Mick Diamond was not her father, and she thanked God for that every day of her life, but he had married her mother when she was already pregnant with another man's child, made her respectable, and then waited for the children of his own that had never arrived. As she ate, Lily felt the oppressive atmosphere that always pervaded her home, and she swallowed quickly and quietly, as she always had. Meals were not something to be enjoyed in this house. They were just a necessary part of life, and the social element of eating had never been made apparent to her until she had gone to friends' homes.